Hello and welcome back to our study of the book of Mark. Today we're back in Mark chapter 14 verses 32 to 52. And in the first part of the chapter, Mark shows the disciples claiming that they will not abandon Jesus. And you remember Peter was the most insistent. Even if they all abandon you, I won't. But he wasn't the only one. The other disciples were saying the same thing, that they weren't going to abandon him. They insisted as well. And now we see that the disciples will get their chance to prove their loyalty to Jesus. So let's read the passage. It says, "They went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, 'Sit here while I pray.' He took Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. 'My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death,' he said to them. 'Stay here and keep watch.' Going a little farther, he fell to the ground and prayed that if possible the hour might pass from him. 'Abba, Father,' he said, 'everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will.' Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. 'Simon,' he said to Peter, 'are you asleep? Couldn't you keep watch for 1 hour? Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak.' Once more he went away and prayed the same thing. When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. They did not know what to say to him. Returning the third time, he said to them, 'Are you still sleeping and resting? Enough. The hour has come. Look, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer.' Just as he was speaking, Judas, one of the 12 disciples, appeared. With him was a crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. 'The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard.' Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, 'Rabbi,' and kissed him. The men seized Jesus and arrested him. Then one of those standing near drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. 'Am I leading a rebellion,' said Jesus, 'that you have come out here with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I was with you teaching in the temple courts, and you did not arrest me. But the scriptures must be fulfilled.' Then everyone deserted him and fled. A young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus. When they seized him, he fled naked, leaving his garment behind." At the supper, Jesus had declared that one of his disciples would betray him. Now the reader already knew that to be Judas, but the disciples seem unaware. Here we see it come to fruition. But first, Mark shows us how Jesus prepares for his suffering in prayer. Mark's account is the darkest of all the Gospels, and he points out how Jesus was deeply distressed and troubled. So let's not gloss over that. He says that his soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. And now that's pretty extreme. And we live in a world where anxiety and depression are common. People deal with this a lot. But in those days, it wasn't common to talk about emotional anguish. So that means this really was a very difficult emotional battle that Jesus was fighting. I think this gives us a beautiful glimpse into the humanity of Jesus. Jesus was completely divine, but he was also completely human. And in his humanity, he knows what it is to face the darkest and most difficult trials of life. Jesus is a Messiah who can sympathize with our weaknesses. We shouldn't take this passage to mean that Jesus was unwilling to go to the cross either. Rather we see how willing he is. He knew what it would cost him. He knew what he would suffer. And he struggled with it, and yet he went anyway. Now, have you ever felt like that? Where you knew something you had to go through was difficult, and you asked God if there could be any other way? It's interesting that he says anything is possible for God, implying that if God wanted to find another way, he could find another way. However, he recognizes that God has a plan and a purpose, and he is going to do God's will no matter what the cost. He faces the cross by spending time fervently in prayer. Meanwhile, his disciples sleep. These guys who said they were going to stick with him, right? Now, the readers might remember a time when the disciples thought they were going to die in a storm and Jesus was asleep in the boat. So, little literary devices going on here. You got to remember what happened. And now Jesus is facing a storm. But this storm will take his life. And the disciples can't keep their eyes open. Jesus makes the statement that the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Now, it seems like he's making this statement about his disciples, right? They've declared that they're willing to go with him, but when it gets difficult, when he's struggling, they're asleep. When they need to be fervently calling out to God, they're asleep. And I can relate to this. It seems to me that when I know I need to pray, I find myself drifting off. My mom used to always tell me, if you pray, the devil will put you to sleep quick. So if you can't sleep, just pray. And she has a point. When we pray, it seems like our eyes get heavy. But I wonder if Jesus was also talking about himself, the fact that he had two natures, both divine and human. And his spiritual nature, his divine nature, is ready to do God's will, wherever the plan leads, but his flesh is struggling to keep up with the spirit. Now, don't get me wrong, Jesus didn't sin or anything like that, but it's interesting that he had that struggle, that battle, and in the end, he overcame. So, the disciples, they can't even pray an hour. Have you tried to pray an hour? I've tried and failed. My mind wanders and I fall asleep, not unlike Peter, James, and John. But I do know great men and women of prayer who have been able to learn how to pray for many hours at a time. And I do believe this is something we should aspire to. So, when Jesus is facing his darkest hour, the disciples fall asleep. The storm that they were afraid of in the boat, that was nothing. This is the real storm. And they can't keep their eyes open. Jesus rested in the earlier storm because he had full trust in God. The disciples are asleep now, not because of their trust, but just simply because they're tired and weak. Now, Jesus had predicted that Peter would deny him 3 times. And 3 times, Peter has been asleep on the job. Jesus told him to watch, but he's asleep. Truly, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Now, ultimately, all of the disciples will run away. And Judas comes and he leads a mob to arrest Jesus, and the mob comes with swords and clubs sent by the priests and the teachers of the law. You remember the guys who wanted to kill him? They didn't come themselves, they sent a mob. Jesus asked why they didn't arrest him when he was teaching in the temple. Can they reasonably accuse him of leading a rebellion? It seems the answer is no. Instead, the teachers of the law and the priests, they want to get rid of Jesus, but they're afraid of turning the crowd against them, so they come at night to arrest him. Judas betrays Jesus with a kiss. A kiss that was supposed to be a warm greeting to a loved and respected teacher. Instead, it's the kiss of death. Mark has been asking the question of what kind of Messiah Jesus is. He's the kind who's betrayed by one of those closest to him. He is a Messiah who has suffered emotional anguish. He's a Messiah who will be put on trial and executed. He is a Messiah who's arrested in the dark by a mob with swords and clubs. He's a Messiah whose followers will ultimately run away in desperation. Yeah, there was that one little attack with the sword, but in the end, they all ran away. Now, Mark adds an interesting detail that isn't in the other Gospels. He tells of a young man who was wearing only a linen garment, and it might have been all he had, we don't know. But when they grab him, he slips out of his clothes and runs away naked. Now, people have speculated about this. Some scholars have speculated that maybe Mark was the young man who ran away, and he's telling his own story here. There's no evidence to back up that claim, but sure, it's interesting. But I think that Mark really adds this detail just to express how desperate Jesus' followers were to get away from him, though they had claimed they would not abandon him. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Jesus His flesh sought an alternative, but he didn't give in. He followed the Spirit, and he obeyed God's will. The disciples in their spirits, they wanted to be faithful to Jesus, but when it got rough, their flesh caused them to run. They succumbed to the flesh. And so it is with the Christian. We are in a battle between flesh and spirit. The flesh wants what is contrary to the Spirit, and we must choose which we will follow. God bless you.